Welcome to Ciao Bella, hosted by me, Erica Firpo, a travel journalist based in Rome. Each episode of Ciao Bella, I sit down with Italy's creators, contemporary artists and artisans, designers, culinary experts, heritage brands, and innovative aesthetes, and more who are defining and redefining 21st century Italy. Pull up a chair and join in. Welcome back to Ciao Bella. Today I'm in the Uffizi Museum with Eike Schmidt, the director of the Uffizi Galleries, which is an incredible opportunity, an incredible experience any day of the week. Welcome.
Hello, and great to have you here as one of the few visitors that we actually have in a time that the museum is not really visited. We have to close right now, but you're here for professional reasons, and that gives you this extraordinary opportunity to come here to the almost empty rooms. Almost empty because we're still working on a number of projects.
Well, you know, it's what Tommaso told me was that it's an incredible experience to just be here and have the entire place to yourself. Though he did say it's kind of big after a while.
That's true, and you never really have it to yourself. I mean, even like 2 a.m. in the morning, there are security guards. 6 a.m. in the morning, the first people come to clean the place, to sanitize it. I like to come early. Even before the lockdown, I like to come early. And I mean, that was the one moment where you could just be almost alone. And well, now it's similar to that for the rest of the day. But yes, I think at any given moment during the day, I'm sure we have about 60 or 70 people somewhere in the building doing something.
Can you remind me when did you start with the Uffizi?
In November 2015.
In 2015, so it's been almost 6 years. This is an incredible place to be in Florence. It's an incredible place to be in history because the museums they opened as offices, in the late 1500s, correct?
Well, the Uffizi was built as an office building. It was kind of the Medici's West Wing from 1560 to 1580-ish, more or less. So they put on the last touches in 85. But basically starting in 1560, over 20 years, and already during that time, in the early 80s, sort of towards the end of the time, Cosimo I's son, Cosimo I was the original patron, and his son, Francesco de' Medici, was actually very much interested in art and science, and he put in the first 2 spaces dedicated to art, and that were the corridors. Originally there was an open loggia on the upper floor, like we have often in Mexico or in other Hispanic locations, and the idea was the very same like there, to have a cool breeze in the afternoon. Francesco closed the loggia with windows and put statuary in there. That was one thing. Then he also had the frescoes painted that are above our heads. These are 99 frescoes with more than 30,000 figures and scenes. So I think nobody ever looked at them all. I mean, I think so far. I mean, we published them for the first time 2 years ago in a really huge volume. And even there, I mean, mysteries remain. So I think we have about 99 subjects for PhD thesis in art history for future students here. Then he also created the Tribuna, an octagonal space on the eastern side of the Uffizi, which in a way was meant to resemble the universe. So you have the 4 elements that were known then, earth, water, fire, and air. And within these elements, artwork. The most precious artworks that the Medici owned were all united there. And that continued. So in the 17th century, when some really important great statuaries brought from the Medici Villa in Rome to Florence, the Medici Venus was shown there for the first time. And from that moment on, all the travelers came, and it was the custom actually for travelers to almost kneel down and kiss the hand of Venus, just to
that I didn't know.
Yeah, just to acknowledge that she is the most beautiful representation of a human being in existence. And well, that ended in the 19th century. So, but still, I mean, that was for about 150 years. Every visitor was meant to do that. Part of the Uffizi experience. Nowadays, not, because if people would continue to do that, now normally we have 4.5 million visitors. She wouldn't have a hand anymore. But at the time, they did that. And then they also put the most precious paintings in the Uffizi. There is a painting by Johann Zoffany in the collection of the Queen of England that shows English travelers on their grand tour in the Tribuna. That's kind of an iconic image of tourism in the 18th century, really a very high-level tourism. It's also very much fictionalized. You only see male visitors. Fortunately, we know from the record books that that we also had a lot of female visitors, fortunately.
Well, I'm sure the painter was a man, that's why.
He was, yes.
Now, speaking of visitors, you have, with the Uffizi, in your tenure, you have opened up the Uffizi more than anyone to different aspects of the Uffizi. I think one of the things that I've always enjoyed is that it feels refreshed. It feels, you know, there's something new, even though it might not be, you know, from the 21st century. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, about what's new.
Well, first of all, we opened a lot of new galleries, and that gave us the opportunity to show the paintings in a different way, with more space between them where necessary. So the big masterworks really in the past were crammed together with secondary works oftentimes, and in several parts of the collection it was, really the collection was hung by topography of the artist's birthplace, which didn't really make a lot of sense because you had to make time travels all the time. So we reconceived the collection and reinstalled it in a more chronological sense, and then we created dialogues between paintings, which in the past was always the main, was one of the main criteria to put paintings together, to make people think, to make people talk to one another, rather than if you have isolated paintings, one next to the other. And we actually have over 3,000 works of art on view, so you can imagine how boring that can get and how mechanical that can get. I mean, if they don't speak to one another, in the end you don't have a real experience. You only have the experience in front of the single work, which would be better served if you would just have the single work in one room. So people always look at the works next to the paintings. In fact, the human eye is such that even colors, you perceive the colors differently if the colors around are different. The Impressionists made that one of their principles in their art, but that's valid and that was known by painters long before. That's why we actually researched and found colors that were appropriate for the age the painters were working. So for the Baroque period, we identified a textile, a velvet, that we had in the room while we constructed this color surface using the traditional techniques. So this looks super contemporary, and yet we use the traditional techniques that were used in the 16th and 17th century for that. And that means that we don't just put a color on the wall. I mean, that's very one-dimensional. But it's really an architectural construction of 5, 8, 12, and sometimes 15 layers of different colors. When we started with the Baroque galleries, our first color after the grounding was really a very, very kind of 1980s pink. And so people looked at it and said, "Oh, are you sure you want to show those?" I said, "Well, just wait a little bit. In a few weeks, this will be all very different." And so actually you start with some light paintings, and then you have darker tones, and then you light it up again. And that means that depending on the light situation, the natural light situation, whether it's morning or afternoon, the color of the wall changes slightly. And because the human eye does perceive the underlying colors as well. And also it makes it a much more vivid surface, and it helps the colors in the painting to actually come out more. And that's something that never happens if you just buy one paint and then put it across. It's more expensive, of course, but it's really worth the investment.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying also is it's the mood will change with the time of day that you're there, the lighting that's in there, and it also will bring out different moods within the paintings that are in the room.
Exactly.
As well.
Exactly. That's very important. And yes, you mentioned it, mood. So paintings that do not just have an intellectual quality, but a very strong emotional and social quality too. And that's very important to pull that out too, and to inspire people through the art. And to let the art inspire people. In Italy, for a long time, and actually amongst Italian intellectuals and art historians, this is still very strong today. The idea is that the museum should really be like a school, and you should learn the facts about the painter, and then you go there to demonstrate whether you learned the dates of the painter and the biography, and that's something that really works not even for 0.01% of our visitors, of course. People generally come here because the Uffizi are famous.
True.
And then do we really want to frustrate them and show them 3,000 times during their visit that they don't know what we expect them to know? No, we don't expect them actually to know that. I think that's wrong. That's not the mission of a museum. Museums should really give something to people and not take something, not test them. I mean, that's not an exam. So that's the reason why we introduced labels for all works of art. In the past, ancient statuary didn't have any labels at all. Because it was thought that people already knew who Tiberius was, would be able to identify him, and then they would just do it amongst themselves. Now they all have labels, and actually that means that people actually stop, take selfies with the sculptures, look at them carefully, draw them. Now we put benches into the galleries. We're sitting on one of them right now. There were about 20 seats spread throughout the galleries when I arrived, and they were generally taken by security guards. And so, right. I mean, only if you had a really very, very elderly visitor, sometimes they were allowed to sit down. Now, everyone is allowed to sit down, is invited to sit down, because if you sit down, you can look at the works of art much, much better. And this also kindles conversation, and that is really one of the primary functions, I think, of an art museum. It was seen like that in the 18th century, the century when museums first became publicly available, open to the public. In fact, the Uffizi is the first historical collection, important historical collection, to open to the public in 1769. From that year on, and that's really more than 20 years before the Louvre. In fact, you could just present yourself at the door and walk in and see the gallery. You didn't need to have a letter of recommendation from your ruler at home or from your archbishop or so, but you could just stop by during your trip to Florence and come in. And the Florentines were invited to come. The entire population was invited to come for free to the Uffizi once a year, every 24th of July, for the day of San Giovanni, the feast of San Giovanni, the patron saint of Florence. And that's a tradition that really brought anyone from Florence, regardless whether rich or poor, regardless what background or what interests they came in, and that was a tradition until 1859, when the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty left Florence. And after that, the modern history of the museum starts, which unfortunately is also a history of making the museum more and more an elitist institution over the decades. I
think that's what happened with a lot of museums at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a worldwide phenomenon. There were some museum directors throughout the world in the late 19th century, early 20th century that really worked against that. But overall, that is something that we have to consider. And in Italy, differently from other countries, this is a tradition that even today, I mean, finds some proponents, strangely, and well, sometimes we have to. I mean, sometimes there's really a public fight about some of these measures to democratize the museum.
Well, one of the things that I've loved, especially over the past year, that the Uffizi has been doing is the digital presence, reaching out to people, around the world in a way that, I hadn't really seen any museum do. I know that the Uffizi is very popular on Instagram, and it was on Twitter, but I guess it was about a year ago, you launched with Facebook. And I mean, I'm going to I have to bring up TikTok. I mean, that was to me one of the, that was probably the months of I don't know, it was May when I first picked up on it. I was it brought so much joy to me. And I was so happy because it didn't just bring joy because I love art and I love seeing the artwork in the Uffizi. It's how it was presented. It was making that conversation.
That was our aim, and you got there in May, so you're very fast. We launched TikTok on April the 28th.
Good.
You found us. So, in fact, differently from our other social media channels, we wanted to use a different language. We embraced the language which is typical for the channel, and that is a self-ironical way of dealing with works of art, presenting works of art, to have contemporary rock music and hip-hop music, to illustrate works of art. Yes, once in a while to make them virtually dance, why not? But also because it was the time of the first lockdown still, and then the first reopening, we also addressed contemporary issues such as social distancing in a self-ironic way, which sometimes is far more effective. And as far as the Generation Z is concerned, I mean, it's the only way you can reach them at all. And they came. And
I think it was great because I think it's created the Uffizi. I consider it, a leader in that digital world for museums, because I don't think there aren't that many museums that are able to talk. I'm going to sound like my mom in their language, and I think it's great because I think that also inspires, that puts the seed in someone's mind that eventually they're going to come here because they want to see not the dancing statue, but they want to see that statue.
Exactly. In fact, I mean, that's one thing that, I mean, nobody believes, and that was one of the criticisms. Well, people might come here to see the famous influencer, and then they might discover that the influencer is not there, and then they might be disappointed to go away. Now, of course, I mean, everyone knows that, yes, this is a cool place because we have famous actors and influencers and fashion icons that come through the galleries. And sometimes you might be surprised by some of the other visitors, but you go here for the art, not for the other visitors.
Exactly.
And, the same thing, I mean, people wouldn't expect the statues to actually dance, but they might come and take a video, which is even better. So, I mean, to use it as a challenge.
It's a challenge, and I think it also, highlights can highlight a detail that you might not have even been looking for, and all of a sudden now you want to go and see, that particular snake coming on that one painting, or there's, and that I think is really what's amazing. I wanted to ask you if you've had any experience with the VR and AR for virtual visits. Is that something that's on the horizon?
We're experimenting both with VR and AR, but we're not at a point at this very moment where we would be ready to launch something. I see advantages, disadvantages, and I see some challenges. I think as the products that we see right now, I don't see any of them to be very easily adaptable to the museum reality, but I think in terms of the vision, just making a little change here and there, some of that could become very interesting. We are obviously mostly off-site. It could be a great means of communication for people who have not the chance to be in Florence and see the original. It might also help see some of the parts of the Uffizi that you cannot safely access normally.
That's what I'm hoping.
Exactly, and that's certainly something we have more than on our radar. I mean, actually, we our digital strategy department, does experiment in that area quite a lot. AR is more likely to become, in my view, a standard feature of museum visits in the future, but it will very much depend upon what the actual gadget will be. So at the moment we don't have a typical AR medium that is established in society. So you remember when the first tablets were launched in the 1990s?
Yeah.
No, they didn't take off.
Like Google Glasses, that was like really cool for like a week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're not there yet, but I think for a museum it's important already to look at the content side. We know already what you can do with AR. You know, the advantages are very clear, and also, but we have to wait for the right medium to actually launch, and because I think what's for sure is that people will bring their own gadgets into the museum. I mean, I don't see it happening that people will actually go and rent a device and then return it at the end of their visit. I mean, that's not how things nowadays work anymore.
No, you'll get your coolest glasses that you can get. You know, like you'll have your own, because I think you're gonna want the best. If who's ever bringing it in, they're gonna want the one that they can get. You know, they're gonna want to be able to personalize it and whatnot, and that's what they're going to be bringing in.
Exactly. In the meantime, normal cell phones work great. So we have over 300 videos that explain the single works of art, and we regularly. We didn't even tell people to do that, but people who knew that we had these videos on our website, they just came with their phones at the galleries with earbuds, of course, and then they stood before the paintings, the statues, and they listened to the video explanation, and I think that was great, and that means that people really found out that this works, and so now we take that into account so that it works off-site but also on-site as an added value to the visit.
Experience.
Thanks for joining me and Uffizi director Eike Schmidt. To keep up with the Uffizi, visit uffizi.it. That's UFFIZI.it. And on Instagram and TikTok, Uffizi Galleries, all one word, and Uffizi TV on YouTube. I'd also like to give a big thank you to Marriott's Westin Excelsior Florence, who lovingly hosted this episode by hosting me in room 510, a top floor room with a panoramic terrace putting me eye to eye with Palazzo Vecchio and the Duomo. Located on the banks of the Arno River at Piazza Ognissanti, the Westin Excelsior is a historic landmark and one of those gorgeous grand hotels that makes you feel like you're part of a period film, like a room with a view. And I also love it because it's incredible position. You're just across the river from San Frediano, a charming borgo, and about a 10-minute walk to Palazzo Vecchio. Find out more at Marriott.com.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Ciao Bella. If you'd like to know more about today's guest, please visit ciaobella.co and click on the podcast link, or go directly to ciaobella.co/podcast. Want more Italy? You can find all my episodes on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher. When you have time, subscribe to iTunes and rate the podcast. What are you waiting for? And if you want to be part of the podcast, email me or DM me your Italy questions. To learn more about me and my work, go to my website, ericafirpo.com, and follow my Italy adventures on Instagram at ericafirpo. Ciao, Bella! And a very big thank you and hug to Massimiliano Yonta and Disc to Disc Studios, the producers of Ciao Bella, who continue to make me sound and feel great.